What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live in living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, please jump on over to DJLittleRock.com. Come on by. The water's fine. I don't know. If it's a pool party, maybe the water's fine. Check availability and get a free price quote. And maybe you can have me at your next event. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous? Use the hashtag What Makes You Famous and find it everywhere. What makes you smarter? Well, let's find out. Let's do it together right here on the program.
Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, mourners pay respects to George Floyd ahead of funeral. Thousands of mourners gathered on Monday to pay their respects to George Floyd in Houston, where he grew up. American flags lined the route of a procession to the Fountain of Praise Church, where people filed by Floyd's casket. A funeral will be held Tuesday for Floyd, an African-American man who died in police custody after a white Minneapolis police officer kneeled on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. His death sparked worldwide protest against police brutality. Quote, "I'm glad he got the send-off he deserved," end quote, said Marcus Williams, a 46-year-old black Houston resident. Quote, "I want the police killings to stop. I want them to reform the process to achieve justice and stop the killing," end quote. This is according to Reuters and the Associated Press. Number 2, Democrats unveil police reform bill. House Democrats on Monday unveiled their police reform proposal as protests continued nationwide over police brutality against African Americans. The bill, the Justice in Policing Act, seeks to ban no-knock warrants in drug investigations as well as chokeholds, which can be fatal. Quote, "True justice can only be achieved with full, comprehensive action," end quote. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, said, quote, "That's what we are doing today. This is a first step. There is more to come," end quote. Before the press conference, where they announced the legislation, leading Democrats kneeled in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the amount of time a white Minneapolis police officer kneeled on the neck of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, killing him 2 weeks ago. This is according to NBC News and ABC News. Number 3, Biden rejects calls to defund police. A spokesman for former Vice President Joe Biden's presidential campaign said Monday that the presumptive Democratic nominee does not support calls to defund police department as part of a reform effort. The spokesman, Andrew Bates, said Biden, quote, "hears and shares the deep grief and frustration of those calling out for change," end quote, following the death of an unarmed and handcuffed black man, George Floyd, in Minneapolis police custody. But Biden backs reforms such as increased funding and, quote, "community policing programs that improve relationships between officers and residents," end quote, Bates said. The position puts Biden at odds with activists calling for slashing funding and making more radical police reforms. Biden traveled to Houston on Monday and met with Floyd's relatives, whose attorneys said Biden's compassion, quote, "meant the world to this grieving family," end quote. This is according to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Number 4, U.S. economy officially entered recession as pandemic hit. The U.S. economy in February slipped into a recession for the first time since 2009. The National Bureau of Economic Research's Business Cycle Dating Committee announced Monday. The news snapped a record 128-month expansion that started at the end of the Great Recession and ended when the coronavirus reached the U.S., forcing non-essential businesses across the country to shut down to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Economists typically define a recession as starting with 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction, but the NBER takes into account domestic production, employment, and other factors. Under those criteria, The group said the economy, which peaked in February, entered a downturn so severe when the coronavirus pandemic hit that it warrants being classified as a recession. This is according to The Guardian and The New York Times. Number 5, Chauvin's bail set at $1.25 million. A Minnesota judge on Monday set bail at $1.25 million for Derek Chauvin, the white Minneapolis officer who was fired and charged with second-degree murder for George Floyd's death. Chauvin pressed his knee onto Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Judge Janice Redding offered Chauvin the option of a lower bail, $1 million, if he agrees to several conditions, including not working in security or law enforcement, surrendering any firearms, and avoiding contact with Floyd's family. 3 other officers have been charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder for their role in Floyd's arrest and restraint. The death of Floyd, who was black, touched off ongoing protest over police brutality against African Americans. This is according to the New York Times and CNN. Number 6, study. Lockdowns prevented 60 million U.S. coronavirus infections. Coronavirus stay-at-home orders prevented about 60 million infections across the United States, according to a study published Monday in the journal Nature. About 285 million infections were averted in China. A separate study from epidemiologists at Imperial College London estimated that stay-at-home orders prevented about 3.1 million deaths in 11 European countries and reduced infection rates by 82%. Quote, without these policies employed, we would have lived through a very different April and May, end quote, said Solomon Siang, director of the Global Policy Laboratory at the University of California at Berkeley, and leader of the team that researched responses in China, the United States, France, Italy, Iran, and South Korea. As U.S. businesses reopen, 20 states are reporting rising numbers of new cases. This is according to the Washington Post and Newsweek. Number 7, Bon Appetit editor steps down after brown-face photo surfaces. Bon Appetit editor-in-chief Adam Rappaport resigned on Monday after a photo emerged showing him in brownface, dressed to reflect a Puerto Rican stereotype on Halloween in 2013. Several of the magazine's staffers, contributors, and YouTube personalities objected to the image. Assistant food editor Sola El-Wiley called for Rappaport's resignation, saying via Instagram that the Halloween photo was, quote, just a symptom of the systematic racism that runs rampant within Condé Nast as a whole, end quote. Rappaport, who became editor-in-chief in 2010, announced on Instagram that he was stepping down, quote, to reflect on the work that I need to do as a human being and allow Bon Appetit to get to a better place, end quote. This is according to CNN. Number 8, judge blocks Northam order to remove Robert E. Lee statue. A Virginia judge on Monday temporarily blocked Governor Ralph Northam's Democrat administration from removing a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee from Richmond's Monument Avenue. Richmond Circuit Court Judge Bradley B. Cavedo granted a 10-day injunction in response to a challenge from a man claiming to be a descendant of a benefactor of the fund that paid for the monument. The judge said Northam's plan to put the statue in storage would violate an 1890 deed stating that the Commonwealth, quote, guaranteed, end quote, that it would, quote, faithfully guard, end quote, the 12-ton statue and 40-foot pedestal in its existing location. Northam's press secretary, Elena Yarmowski, said the governor, quote, remains committed to removing this divisive symbol from Virginia's capital city, and we're confident in his authority to do so, end quote. This is according to the Progress Index. Number 9, World Bank, pandemic could push 100 million into poverty. The World Bank estimates that the economic slowdown will push 70 million to 100 million people into poverty, up from a previous estimate of 40 million to 60 million people. The novel coronavirus pandemic and the lockdowns imposed to slow its spread this year will drag the global economy to its deepest recession in 80 years, causing worldwide output to contract by 5.2% in 2020, the World Bank says. Emerging and developing economies, including Russia, Brazil, and India, are expected to shrink for the first time in 60 years. The World Bank expects nations in Latin America and the Caribbean to suffer the hardest blow, forecasting that the region will experience a 7.2% GDP decline. This is according to CNN and the Financial Times. Number 10, the Pointer Sisters' Bonnie Pointer dies at 69. Bonnie Pointer, one of the founding members of the Pointer Sisters, died Monday. She was 69. Her sister, Anita Pointer, broke the news to admirers. Quote, "It is with great sadness that I have to announce to the fans of the Pointer Sisters that my sister Bonnie died this morning," end quote. Anita Pointer said, quote, "Our family is devastated. On behalf of my siblings and I and the entire Pointer family, we ask for your prayers at this time," end quote. Bonnie sang on early Pointer Sisters songs, including, quote, "Yes We Can, end quote, before leaving the group in the mid-1970s to launch a solo career. A few months ago, Anita and Bonnie Pointer released a tribute song called, quote, "Feels Like June," end quote, dedicated to their youngest sister, June, who died in 2006. It was Bonnie Pointer's final recording. This is according to Variety. That's 10 things you need to know today for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you sticking around with me on these newscasts on the What Makes You Smarter feed. I hope you're doing reasonably well. Let me know what you're up to. Drop me some comments. I really want to know. And subscribe and like and all that kind of thing. Also, if you want to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag WhatMakesYouFamous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. Peace. I'm out of here.
If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at SmarterWhat, and YouTube. Username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/Keys Dan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening.